I think I know what the community might rally behind.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, look, we're definitely going to play a part in this.
Yeah.
Coming home, wanting Azeroth again, wanting Warcraft again, because right now the current dev team, and I say the current dev team just to, delineate that even the current dev team is actually, in terms of turnover rate and stuff, pretty different from the Legion dev team. And that's a pretty different team from the MOP team, and, going back and back and back. The current dev team don't seem to have an interest in core Warcraft. As much, right? They do seem to be a lot more interested in cosmic elements, sci-fi elements. I saw it was one of the really good threads by Magdalena on Twitter. Actually about the whole, on the fractals and all the crazy stuff and the multiple forces, and that actually being very similar to a fantasy series that is penned by one of the guys who contributed to Folk and Fairy Tales. But it's just interesting. It's that thing where, they're talking about the fractals. They're talking about the seventh force. I really don't think that players give a flying fuck about most of the new ways they're pushing the lore. It's like Night Elf players care about Night Elf stuff, and I guess a bit of Tyrande, but even with that, we've seen the Night Elf players feel pretty damn battered over the storylines that they've got. If you, got into Warcraft because you saw, the Grom sacrifice in Warcraft 3 and thought that was all really cool, or maybe you were, you got into Warlords of Draenor because you saw, big sweaty orc, lots of muscles, does a cool thing, does his big cry for freedom with his axe in the air. That is quite simply not what Warcraft is really delivering as much anymore. It's in this weird thing where Warcraft, it's getting modern edgy, modern soft, and very cosmic and complicated. And I really think that the core fan base of Warcraft isn't super into those things. So I actually think what's going to happen is you're going to have that big clatter of voices, as you said. Definitely. But from what I've seen, I think they will begin to coalesce with, okay, the systems are fighting with us less. Now what we want to talk about is content. And I think people will want the setting of Warcraft to actually be Warcraft and, not us going and flying into the fractals or any crazy stuff that they might think is a good idea. And it seriously don't. They're going to want to go back in terms of setting and have Warcraft be Warcraft. I think that's one thing that I'm not going to say it's 100% consensus, of course, but I think it's decently surefire. So there's that. And then people start to talk about content because a lot of people have been playing FF14 and they've seen that in terms of how they can just tell a story in a game, completely blows the socks off WoW. Yes, A Realm Reborn does have its issues, obviously, but, you go into the later stuff, that I've seen in that game, because there was a bunch of Stormblood cinematics and stuff. That is actually before I played FF, but there's a bunch of Stormblood cutscenes and things that you showed me just to say, well, here's what's going on at the other side.
Yeah. And
it totally... I mean, there's even parts of A Realm Reborn that, in terms of, you being a character and them telling a story, ARR in certain places blows the socks off WoW. And that's saying nothing for Heavensward and beyond. So people are going to start making those comparisons. And then they're going to think about some of the player freedoms that they might be used to in Guild Wars 2. Maybe how mounts are way more cool than they are in WoW in Guild Wars 2. They're going to start thinking about these other MMOs. They're going to start thinking about content. And I think what we're going to realize is that, we've got the 3 pillars of PvP, M+, and raiding. But when WoW was at its most successful, there's some other things going on. Leveling was a far larger part of the journey. Getting your mount was a far larger part of the journey. Having unique, cool mounts you've never really seen before and a type of creature you've never seen before was way more of a thing in those early days. And now we're in a situation where we can't really have any of those things because we're on Mount 500 and something or whatever it might be. And all of that. So people are going to start wanting new cool things. So I think a return to Azeroth is what they want. And then also, instead of the new expansion saying, hey, here's a big build around feature, here's a new borrowed power feature, I think what people actually just are going to want is new ideas, more content, better content, new things to do. And I think it's just that thing that, you could say that Warfronts and Island Expeditions fit into that. Problem is that both of those had severe and very basic, by the way, game design issues.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. Like islands, when they were way harder, at 1 or 2 points in beta, were like kind of fun to knock around in. But then it's how they tied the islands into the reward loop. You know, like what they did with Torghast, funny enough. They made the same mistake again. Yeah, so we need like cool new features that people actually get really excited about, again, that are not features that fall into the usual Blizzard Entertainment pitfalls.
Yeah. I mean, I've actually got, obviously the thing to do is talk about, what content looks like in a way that isn't just reward loop stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the one that, because it does fit into the reward loop, but I'm thinking of the Bajan Southern Front in FF, where, because you were talking about, how you can't just go get a mount anymore. There's no meaningful journey for you to go and get in World of Warcraft in that sense, right?
You were referring more to how a lot of mounts are like Paragon box grinds where it's just random rares and stuff.
Yeah, so there's a couple different things. Because Islands and Warfronts were kind of okay in their conception, execution a bit awful, but the reason people really didn't like them was because they were tied into all of the current systems and stuff. But like, to use the Bajan Southern Front as an idea, where it is, here is a place where there's, the FF equivalent of world quests, it's got the FF equivalent of world bosses, it's got the FF equivalent of a dungeon at the end. But it's a different area that you progress in at your own time, at your own leisure. Sure, you can get some gear there, but it's like an alternative path that is like generally a bit slower. Well, depends on what part you are, but generally a bit slower than, gearing traditionally. So it's this little self-contained thing that you didn't really have to interact with if you wanted to do other parts of the game, but it was there, it was content. And it wasn't just like a Suramar, where Suramar is just pure quests. Suramar was just like primarily, story quests.
Yeah.
Get some mana. That was it. But like, there's a version of the Maw, for example, where you didn't go into the Maw every week to do all this stuff that resulted in player power, but you went into the Maw and you went in there whenever you wanted, but you had a progression system there that was completely unique to that. You maybe unlocked the ability to mount it the same way you unlocked the ability to go to the Beast Warrens and stuff like that over time. There's a world where that content is just, hello, we have carved out a big swathe of content that feels like a small world inside World of Warcraft, which, I mean, it's going to be counter to what people want and expect out of the World of Warcraft, where initially the pillars of endgame were all blended quite well. But I think we've completely jumped that shark. There's no going back to what vanilla feels like, especially not with classic, because they'll just go, well, that market's sort of covered. But a version of that actually works with today's game is to have your end game content hub, where you've got your rating, you've got your M+, you've got your PvP, but then you also have a more traditional World of Warcraft like experience, where maybe there's a zone that you can't mount in initially, you can't fly in initially, maybe you never can fly, but you aren't going there for a reason outside of a well-paced like progression up through for cosmetics and for power within that zone.
I think then the issue you run into is there's some who would say that Korthia does that, and that Korthia does have an alternate gearing system, and it does have its own little progression path, things like that. But then that's when we get into the very nuts and bolts basics of game design.
Yeah.
Where the Korthia gameplay loop, realistically, how it's actually played by people who would properly engage with the system, it is stand in middle, wait for tomcats or whatever add-on you have to glow red in the map, go to the rare, kill the rare, go back to the middle of the map, because if you're not in the middle of the map, then your travel times won't be optimal. And then it's that thing where it's like, it's not really fun. Now it's that thing, Korthia is full of parts that I like, because some of the rares are like a little bit of a break in pace, a little bit new and different, but it still all amounts to the same: stand in the middle of the zone, wait, go do a thing. It's like not a gameplay style where you actually go out and do things. You react to a UI prompt. You basically don't experience much gameplay. You get a random reward. You go back to the middle. There's not much of a progression there. And then the zone itself, it has its own story early on, but then it just gets thrown into the campaign. So it's not like you've got a lot of progression that feels good in Korthia. And it's really funny because this is all stuff they've done way better in the past.
Yeah, I mean, Timeless Isle is a pretty decent example of that to an extent.
Yeah, even before that, the Isle of Thunder, right? It's weird that what's basically happened is the Timeless Isle worked, and then Blizzard have basically iterated on the same idea of the Timeless Isle, just again and again and again and again since. They haven't actually tried to do a big cool new thing that much.
Yeah, they've amped up engagement with their Timeless Isle ideas, and sometimes them successful, with Mechagon and Najatar being okay, being better in some ways, worse in others. But then Korthia feels like they learned none of those lessons whatsoever.
Yeah, I guess you see Korthia and then you just get quite confused about how it's just that thing. In Korthia, I can see the passion of the individual designers.
Yeah.
But I do see an overall architecting of that gameplay experience that leaves a lot to be desired.
Yeah.
So it's as if the team lead really didn't understand how to make a fun zone, but all the people on the team really tried their best in all of the parts.
That's what it feels like, yeah.
So I think it's like a lot of these things, it's that thing. The system stuff's really important because when the systems are wrong, they mess up the core game experience. However, to solely focus just on systems is just to look at a red herring. Because I think that systems truly are a red herring, and one of the real issues is content. And I think the expansion that proves that's Legion, because Legion was rife with systems issues. Like I remember, throughout the Legion beta process, like me, I think Preach as well, kind of railed on a good few of the systems. Like the legendary acquisition was one thing. Legion was a decently fictitious launch experience in some bizarre ways versus, how Legion ended up being by the end. But people generally fought through all of those problems because it turned out there was a lot of content to do.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have the perfect anecdote for why that actually mattered to the player experience. And my memory is a little hazy because this was, a number of years ago. But I'm pretty sure I got one of the best legendaries. I think, was it I don't think it was the best one for prop. I think it was the best ret legendary. I got it second, but I got it from the chest at the end of the Withered Training scenario. Because the way they said, legendaries can drop from anything. So if you're just going doing stuff, you can get a legendary. You don't need to go and do specific content for it. You don't need to go and do, specific content for a chance. It was just engage in the many, many things that are on this world to do, and you'll get some form of reward for it. And I remember getting the legendary from that chest, which means I personally didn't care about that system being bad, because to be fair, I got lucky, but also I got it when I was doing content.
Yeah.
That was just not there any other time in the game. It's just, there was so much stuff to do that it never bothered me, it never occurred to me. And I guess some of that is likely down to fatigue from the same design, where they've reused the kind of Legion, the world's full of like rares and map stuff, or rares and treasures. They've kind of reused that a little bit, so I think some of it's lost its...
totally, 100%,
lost how it feels to actually engage with, because it's no longer new, but also it's just that little thing of, you could get your legendary from a treasure. Even like the Lothian Prowler was kind of nice to get early because it was very different, very new. But then...
I mean, I would have rather worked to get my Lothian Prowler through some sort of wrap or something, but sure.
Yeah, but it's that idea of if they can get people to feel okay when they're playing the game and enjoy the game experience, then systems aren't quite as much a problem.
True.
But that's when the systems are the only thing. It's like we're only seeing the systems as a problem because there's nothing to hide them.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the hardest things to get across, like as a wider community as well, to talk about, because so many people have different ideas for what content is good, what isn't good. And I think specifically in World of Warcraft, because so many players of World of Warcraft have only played World of Warcraft or only playing MMOs, because if you play an open world game that borrows heavily from MMO design, but is outside of the MMO market, it is astounding how much better it is in in most ways conceptually than what World of Warcraft is, because it feels like it's out on this bubble away from other games.
Yeah, that's a big issue for a while.
Along with a decent part of the community, which means that so much progression that video games have gone through overall haven't happened there because they've been isolated. So actual content quality is really, really hard to talk about.
Yeah, and it's that thing where I think Blizzard they're maybe borrowing less from the competition than people felt they used to. I guess as we kind of loop this back to your original point, it's very easy for the community to rally behind these systems being a large problem in WoW. I think the next stage then is for the community to rally behind what do they want Warcraft to be? Do they want it to be this new form of Warcraft that is moving away from sort of traditional fantasy and is moving towards, I don't even know what to call it, because it's not like high fantasy, it's not low fantasy, it still is rooted in some of those older Warcraft aspects, but, you know, we're talking about the various forces and stuff emerging from the Fractals and all of this stuff that I think players are not particularly enthused by, right? It's that thing, I guess, you over-explain the mystery and then, oh dear, what are you left with? So I think like that and then content, those are the things for the community to rally behind. And I think there will be a decent amount of agreement on that, to be honest.